12 hours ago my dad hugged me for what felt like the first time in my life. That same night I found the birthday gift I'd spent 6 months making for him smashed inside our trash can. I stood beside the garbage bin without moving, staring at the broken walnut chess set buried beneath paper plates, napkins and coffee grounds. The carved king had snapped clean in half. The queen was missing her crown, and the board I had sanded until it felt like polished glass was split down the middle. 6 months of late nights, blistered hands and quiet hope had ended in a trash bag. I couldn't even bring myself to cry. My chest felt hollow, as though every childhood memory of trying to earn my father's approval had been proven right in a single moment. Maybe he had smiled only to spare my feelings. Maybe the hug had meant nothing after all. I slowly closed the lid, walked back inside and climbed the stairs without making a sound. Everyone else had gone to bed, believing the birthday celebration had ended perfectly. No one noticed me slip into my room or pull an old suitcase from the closet. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing how many different places these stories reach. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another one. Stay with me because what looked like a father rejecting his daughter's handmade gift turned into a family secret none of us saw coming. I folded my clothes with shaking hands, packed the few things that truly belonged to me and zipped the suitcase shut. Before sunrise I would be gone. I was certain my family wouldn't try to stop me because if the gift that carried my whole heart could be thrown away so easily, then maybe I could too. As I stared at the packed suitcase beside my bed, my mind drifted back 6 months to the moment everything had begun. It happened on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. My parents were sitting on the back porch while I carried laundry through the hallway. I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard Dad laugh softly before his voice grew quiet. "I haven't played a real game of chess since my father passed," he said. "I still miss those evenings." Those words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. My grandfather had died when I was young, yet I remembered the old wooden chessboard that always sat on his table. Dad rarely spoke about him, so hearing that small confession felt like discovering a hidden piece of his heart. His 65th birthday was only months away. I wanted to give him something meaningful, but my savings barely covered rent, groceries and gas. Buying an expensive gift wasn't possible. Then an idea came to me while I stood in the garage looking at my woodworking tools. If I couldn't buy something valuable, I would build something no store could ever sell. The next weekend I bought a block of dark walnut wood with the little money I had left. Every evening after finishing work I disappeared into the garage. At first it was only for an hour, but soon I stayed until midnight, surrounded by the smell of fresh sawdust and the sound of carving tools scraping across wood. Each chess piece demanded patience. One careless cut could ruin hours of work. I ruined my first bishop, cracked 2 pawns, and carved a knight whose face looked more like a dog than a horse. Every mistake meant starting over with another piece of walnut. My hands quickly became covered with tiny cuts and blisters. Some nights my fingers hurt so badly that holding the carving knife felt impossible. Still, I returned the following evening because I wasn't simply making a chess set. I was chasing a moment I had imagined since I was a little girl. Just once, I wanted my father to look at something I had created and say the words I had waited my whole life to hear. "I'm proud of you." He wasn't a cruel man. He worked hard, paid every bill and always made sure we had what we needed. But compliments were rare and affection even rarer. I learned to measure his approval through silence, hoping one day it would become something more. As the weeks passed, the chess set slowly came to life. The board gleamed after countless layers of polish, and every piece carried tiny details carved by hand. Looking at it filled me with hope. I didn't realize someone else had started paying attention. My older brother Cole often passed through the garage on his way inside. At first he simply glanced at the workbench. Then his questions became more frequent. "What are you always doing out here? Why do you keep locking the garage?" I always smiled and changed the subject, wanting the birthday gift to remain a surprise. I never noticed the curiosity in his eyes slowly giving way to something much darker. The weeks disappeared faster than I expected, and before I knew it, my dad's 65th birthday had arrived. I wrapped the finished chess set in simple brown paper with a dark blue ribbon. It wasn't fancy, but I hoped what was inside would matter more than the wrapping itself. By early evening, the house was full of relatives, neighbors, and old family friends. The kitchen buzzed with conversation while my mom carried out homemade dishes, And someone kept insisting Dad tell the same stories everyone had already heard a dozen times. For once, the house felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. The wooden box sat quietly beside my chair throughout dinner. Every time I looked at it, my stomach tightened. I had imagined this moment for months, yet I suddenly wondered if the gift would seem childish compared to the expensive watches, golf clubs, and bottles of wine stacked on the table. When dessert was finished, everyone encouraged Dad to open the presents. One by one, he thanked each person with his usual polite smile. Then my mother looked at me and nodded. "Tessa, I think it's your turn." My hands trembled as I carried the box across the room. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said softly. "I hope you like it." He smiled, untied the ribbon, and carefully lifted the lid. The room became completely silent. For several seconds he didn't say a word. Instead, he reached inside and picked up the carved king, turning it slowly beneath the light. His fingers traced every detail before he set it down and lifted another piece. He unfolded the board and gently ran his palm across the polished walnut squares as though he were touching a memory instead of wood. Finally, he looked at me with eyes brighter than I had ever seen. "You made this?" he asked quietly. I nodded, suddenly unable to speak. He swallowed hard before saying, "This reminds me of the chess games I played with my father when I was your age. I never thought I'd hold something that brought those memories back." His voice cracked at the end of the sentence. He stood from his chair, walked across the room, and wrapped his arms around me. For a moment I froze. I couldn't remember the last time my father had hugged me. Maybe it had happened when I was a child, or maybe never like this. The entire room erupted into applause and several relatives wiped away tears. My mother smiled through watery eyes, clearly as surprised as I was. Dad held the chess set close before looking at everyone gathered around him. "This," he said, "is the most meaningful birthday gift I've ever received." My heart felt lighter than it had in years. Every late night in the garage, every blister, every ruined piece I had started over suddenly seemed worth it. As everyone admired the chess set and congratulated me, I noticed one person standing apart from the celebration. Cole clapped with everyone else, but his smile never reached his eyes. He watched our father praise me with an expression I couldn't quite understand. While the room celebrated together, something cold settled behind his calm face, and I had no idea that this single moment was about to change everything. As the evening wore on, the laughter gradually faded. One by one, relatives hugged my parents goodbye, collected their coats, and drove away. The living room that had been filled with voices only minutes earlier became strangely quiet. My mother began stacking empty plates in the kitchen while I gathered cups from the coffee table. Dad never let the chess set out of his sight. Before heading upstairs, he lifted the wooden box with both hands as carefully as if it were made of glass. He smiled at me across the hallway. "I'm going to keep this in my study," he said. "It deserves a place where everyone can see it." Hearing those words filled me with relief. Every fear I had carried for 6 months seemed to disappear. I watched him walk toward his office, feeling happier than I had in years. After helping Mom finish the dishes, I tied up the garbage bags and carried them outside. The cool night air felt refreshing after the warmth inside the house. I opened the large trash bin and lifted the first bag inside. As I reached for the second one, something caught my eye. A piece of dark walnut wood was sticking through the plastic. At first I barely noticed it. Then I recognized the color and smooth finish. My breathing slowed. I carefully pulled the bag back onto the driveway and knelt beside it. My fingers shook as I tore the plastic open. The first thing I saw was a broken pawn. Then half of the carved king. Coffee grounds clung to the polished wood, and scraps of birthday wrapping paper were tangled between shattered pieces. I dug deeper until I found the board itself. It had been split almost perfectly down the center. The hinges were bent. Corners had splintered. Nearly every chess piece had been snapped, crushed, or chipped beyond recognition. The world around me seemed to disappear. I couldn't understand what I was looking at, yet my mind immediately created an answer. Dad had accepted the gift because everyone was watching. He had thanked me. He had hugged me. Then, after the guests left, he decided it wasn't worth keeping. I stood there for several minutes, unable to move. My chest felt tight, but no tears came. The pain was too deep for crying. Without saying a word to anyone, I pushed the torn garbage bag back into the bin and quietly walked inside. The house was peaceful. My parents were upstairs and the lights in Dad's study were already off. No one noticed me climb the stairs. Inside my bedroom, I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. Every memory from the evening replayed in my head, but now each smile felt fake, every kind word rehearsed. I pulled an old suitcase from the closet and placed it on my bed. If my father's hug had only been an act to spare my feelings, then there was nothing left for me in this house. One shirt after another, I folded my clothes into the suitcase, quietly preparing to leave before anyone woke up, convinced that disappearing would hurt less than staying where I believed I had never truly belonged. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the broken chess pieces buried beneath garbage. By the time the first light appeared through my bedroom window, I had already made my decision. There was nothing left to explain. I zipped my suitcase, looked around the room where I had spent most of my life, and quietly carried my belongings downstairs. The house was silent. My mother was still asleep, and the hallway clock seemed unusually loud in the stillness. Before leaving, I sat at the kitchen table with a sheet of paper. The words refused to come at first. Finally, I began to write. I thanked my parents for giving me a place to grow up and for every sacrifice they had made over the years. Then I apologized for never becoming the daughter I believed they wanted. I ended the letter with a simple promise that they wouldn't have to worry about me anymore. Reading those sentences hurt more than writing them. I folded the letter, placed it beside the fruit bowl where it couldn't be missed, and picked up my suitcase. My hand had just reached the front door when I heard footsteps behind me. Tessa. I froze. Dad stood at the bottom of the staircase wearing yesterday's sweater, his hair slightly messy from sleep. He looked from my face to the suitcase in my hand, his expression filled with confusion. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Where are you going this early?" I couldn't find the strength to answer. Instead, I quietly opened the front door and walked outside. He followed me without another word. When we reached the driveway, I stopped beside the trash bin and slowly lifted the lid. Then I stepped aside. Dad looked inside. At first, he didn't understand what I wanted him to see. Then his eyes landed on the torn garbage bag. He pulled it open, and within seconds the broken chess pieces came into view. His face drained of color. He carefully lifted half of the wooden king into his hand as though he couldn't believe it was real. "What?" he whispered. "How did this get here?" I stared at him, waiting for the truth I thought I already knew. "You threw it away." The words came out quietly, but they carried every bit of pain I had been holding inside. His head snapped toward me. "No." The answer came immediately. "I never threw this away." He looked back into the trash, clearly shaken. "I spent half the night looking for it. I thought someone had moved it after the party. I checked my study, the dining room, even the garage because I couldn't remember where I'd set the box down. I wanted to display it this morning." His voice wasn't defensive. It sounded genuinely distressed. He shook his head over and over. "Tessa, I would never do this. That chess set meant more to me than you realize." For the first time since opening that garbage bag the night before, doubt replaced certainty. If Dad hadn't destroyed my gift, then someone else had. And that meant everything I believed over the past 12 hours was suddenly impossible to explain. Dad gently placed the broken king back into the garbage bag and turned toward me with a determination I hadn't seen before. "You're not leaving," he said quietly. "Not until we find out who did this." For the first time that morning, I believed he wasn't trying to comfort me with empty words. He truly wanted answers. We carried the damaged chess pieces inside and spread them across the dining table. Seeing every broken fragment in the daylight made the loss even harder to accept. My mother walked into the room moments later, smiling at first until she noticed my suitcase, the shattered board, and the look on our faces. "What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Dad explained everything as calmly as he could. Mom listened without interrupting, covering her mouth in disbelief as she looked at the ruined gift. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I thought you had already taken it to your study." "So did I," Dad replied. The three of us began retracing the previous evening step by step. We talked through every moment after dinner, trying to remember who had been in each room and when everyone had started leaving. Then Mom suddenly paused. "Wait," she said slowly. "I remember seeing Cole." Dad looked at her. He was carrying a large garbage bag outside while most of us were still talking in the living room. I thought he was just helping clean up early. The room fell silent. None of us had paid attention to it at the time because it seemed like such an ordinary thing to do. Dad frowned but didn't jump to conclusions. There could be an innocent explanation, he said. Let's not accuse anyone without knowing the facts. A few minutes later, while Dad was checking the driveway, our next-door neighbor, Mr. Harris, happened to be walking his dog. Dad greeted him and casually mentioned the damaged chess set, hoping someone might have noticed something unusual. Mr. Harris thought for a moment before answering. Actually, I did see your son outside pretty late last night, he said. He was standing by the trash bins. I heard several loud bangs like someone hitting wood with something heavy. I assumed he was breaking old boards before throwing them away. Dad thanked him, but I could see the color slowly leaving his face. When we returned inside, Cole had just come downstairs, stretching as though it were any normal morning. Dad remained calm. Cole, he said, do you know anything about Tessa's chess set? For a brief second my brother froze. Then he forced a puzzled expression. What chess set? The one she gave me yesterday. So, I haven't seen it. Dad didn't raise his voice. Your mother remembers you taking a garbage bag outside before the party ended. Cole shrugged. I was just cleaning. A moment later he added, actually, I think someone else asked me to take it. Then, after another question, he claimed he hadn't gone outside until everyone had already left. Each answer contradicted the one before it. The silence in the room grew heavier with every excuse. No one said the words aloud yet, but we all reached the same conclusion. Someone hadn't simply destroyed my gift. Someone had wanted me to believe my own father had rejected it. The room remained silent after Cole's last excuse. No one argued with him. No one raised their voice. Dad simply watched him with a steady expression that seemed harder to face than anger. Cole, he said quietly, look me in the eye and tell me the truth. My brother avoided his gaze. He folded his arms, unfolded them again, then took a few restless steps across the kitchen. Every second that passed made the silence heavier. Finally, Dad spoke again. I already know your story doesn't add up. This is your chance to be honest. Cole let out a long breath and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the confidence he usually carried was gone. I did it, he said. The words were barely louder than a whisper, but they echoed through the room. Mom stared at him in disbelief. What are you saying? I destroyed the chess set. I felt my knees weaken as I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. Even after all the suspicion, hearing him admit it out loud felt impossible to process. Cole rubbed his face with both hands before continuing. When Dad opened that gift. His voice cracked. The way he looked at you. I'd never seen him like that before. He glanced toward me for only a second before looking away again. Then he said it was the greatest birthday gift he'd ever received. Another painful silence followed. I couldn't stand it. He admitted that growing up he had always believed he would be the child who made Dad proud. He was the older sibling, the one expected to succeed first, to receive praise, to be noticed. Over the years, that belief had quietly turned into resentment whenever attention shifted away from him. I know it sounds stupid, he said, but when everyone started clapping for you, it felt like I disappeared. Dad didn't interrupt. Cole swallowed hard before finishing the story. After people got distracted, I took the chess set into the garage. I grabbed a hammer and started hitting it. Mom gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. I wasn't thinking, he continued. I just wanted it gone. He explained how he stuffed the broken pieces into a garbage bag, mixed them with the party trash, and carried everything outside. Then he left the torn wood where I would eventually find it. I knew you'd believe Dad threw it away, he admitted, his voice filled with shame. I knew you'd stop trusting him. He lowered his head. I even hoped you'd leave. No one moved. The confession hung over the room like a weight none of us knew how to carry. Dad looked at the shattered chess pieces scattered across the table, then back at his son. You didn't just destroy wood, he said quietly. You tried to destroy your sister's faith in this family. Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't only because of the broken gift anymore. The person who had convinced me my father didn't love me wasn't a stranger. It was my own brother. And in that heartbreaking moment, every member of our family realized the deepest damage had never been done to the chess set. It had been done to the trust we thought could never be broken. After Cole's confession, no one spoke for several moments. The silence felt heavier than any argument could have been. The broken chess pieces still covered the dining table, quietly reminding us how years of unspoken feelings had finally reached their breaking point. I wiped my eyes and looked at my father. There was a reason I believed it, I said softly. He met my gaze without saying anything. When I found the chess set in the trash, I never stopped to ask questions because part of me thought it made sense. His expression changed. I spent my whole childhood trying to make you proud. Every good grade, every achievement, every little success. I kept hoping you'd smile, say something, or tell me I had done well. Most of the time you just nodded and moved on. The words poured out before I could stop them. I know you worked hard for this family. I know you weren't trying to hurt me. But I never knew what you were thinking because you almost never said it. Dad slowly lowered his head. I convinced myself that if my own father could throw away something I made with love, maybe I had never been enough in the first place. Hearing those words seemed to break something inside him. He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. I never realized you carried that feeling for so many years, he admitted quietly. In my mind, providing for my family was how I showed love. My father was the same way. He rarely praised us, and I grew up believing actions mattered more than words. He looked directly at me. I thought you already knew how proud I was. A tear rolled down my cheek. I didn't. Across the table, my mother suddenly began crying. I should have done something years ago, she whispered. We both turned toward her. I saw the way Cole reacted whenever attention wasn't on him. I noticed the little comments, the resentment, and the competition between you two. Every time I thought about confronting it, I told myself it would pass. I kept choosing peace instead of dealing with the problem. She shook her head through tears. I was afraid of family arguments, so I ignored warning signs that were right in front of me. Cole remained silent, staring at the floor. For the first time since he confessed, he spoke without trying to defend himself. I blamed everyone except myself, he said quietly. Instead of celebrating my sister, I treated her like she had stolen something from me. No one interrupted him. The conversation continued for hours. We spoke about disappointments that had never been discussed, expectations that had never been explained, and emotions each of us had hidden behind polite smiles for years. It wasn't comfortable. Some truths were painful to hear. Others were even harder to admit. Yet for the first time in our lives, no one pretended everything was fine simply to avoid another difficult conversation. The broken chess set had forced open wounds that had been buried for years, and although the honesty hurt, it finally gave our family a chance to begin healing instead of hiding behind silence. When the conversation finally came to an end, the house felt emotionally drained. We had uncovered truths that had been hidden for years, but honesty alone could not erase what had happened. The broken chess set was still lying across the dining table, and the damage to our family couldn't simply be forgotten because everyone had confessed their feelings. Dad stood up and faced Cole. His voice remained calm, but there was a firmness I had never heard before. What you did wasn't a mistake made in a moment of anger, he said. You made a series of choices. You destroyed something your sister created with love. Then you tried to make her believe I had rejected her. That kind of betrayal doesn't disappear with an apology. Cole kept his eyes on the floor. I know, he answered quietly. Dad shook his head. I don't think you fully understand it yet. He explained that jealousy was a feeling everyone experienced from time to time, but acting on it was a decision. Breaking months of hard work, damaging trust between a father and daughter, and hoping someone would leave their own family crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. There have to be consequences, he continued. The words hung heavily in the room. I want you to move out for now. This isn't because I don't love you. It's because you need time to face what you've become and find help dealing with the resentment you've carried for so long. Until you're willing to take responsibility and work on yourself, you can't stay here. Cole nodded slowly. For the first time since his confession, he didn't argue or search for excuses. He simply accepted what Dad had decided. Later that afternoon, after the house had grown quiet again, I walked back outside to the trash bin. The garbage bag was still there. I carefully opened it and began collecting every broken piece of the chess set. Some fragments were no larger than a fingernail. Others had deep cracks running through them. I wrapped each one in a clean towel and carried them into the garage. Mom watched from the doorway. I thought you might throw it away, she said gently. I looked down at the damaged board resting on my workbench. No, I replied. This isn't where its story ends. I knew repairing it would take weeks, maybe even months. Some pieces would never look exactly the way they had before. The cracks would always exist. But that didn't mean the gift had lost its value. As I arranged the broken pieces in careful rows, I realized something had changed inside me. For years I had measured my worth by whether someone else approved of me. I had spent countless days trying to earn praise that I believed would finally make me feel enough. Now I understood something different. The chess set had always been valuable because of the love, patience, and care I poured into creating it. Someone else's jealousy couldn't erase that truth. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rebuilding the chess set to prove myself to anyone else. I was rebuilding it because I respected the person who had made it. And that person was finally learning to value herself. Several months passed, and little by little, life found a new rhythm. Rebuilding the chess set became more than a woodworking project. On weekends, Dad and I worked side by side in the garage, carefully repairing each damaged piece. Some cracks disappeared almost completely, while others remained faintly visible despite our best efforts. We never tried to hide every mark because they had become part of the story. One Saturday morning, Dad asked me to close my eyes before leading me into his study. "Okay," he said with a smile. "You can look now." Standing against the wall was a beautiful handcrafted display case with clear glass panels and a solid walnut frame. Inside, the restored chess set rested on a velvet-lined shelf, protected and proudly displayed. "I built this for your gift," Dad said quietly. "It deserves a permanent place in this house." Then he opened the case and revealed a small brass plaque fixed beneath the board. Read, "Handcrafted by my daughter, Tessa Wynne. The greatest gift I have ever received." I couldn't hold back my tears. Not because of the words alone, but because I finally believed them. Later that afternoon, we removed the chess set from the display case and arranged the pieces for our first game together. One repaired crack still crossed the center of the board. It caught the light every time we moved a piece, quietly reminding us that healing doesn't erase painful memories. It simply allows them to become part of something stronger. As the game unfolded, I realized the greatest gift had never been the chess set itself. It was discovering that my father had treasured it from the very beginning. His love had never been thrown away. Someone else's jealousy had nearly convinced me otherwise, but the truth reached us before silence could separate our family forever. If this story touched your heart, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories, and I'll see you in the next one.